Good morning to you all. My name is Sergio Morales, Chief Director of Business in Transportation Latin America in DHL Supply Chain. And welcome to this third edition of our Transportation Forum. And remember that this conference can be listened to in three languages: Spanish, English, or Portuguese. Select your language in the top part of your screen. And during this session, you will have the opportunity to make your questions in the chat you have below your screen. Please use this space only for questions and write it with the word question so we can identify it. You can visit the agenda in our website there in your screen. And also, I invite you to share in social media photos, selfies, or your experience of how you're living this event. And you can use the hashtag DHLTF2020 to keep up with the conversation. And continuing with our event, this pandemic represents challenges in all aspects. Economics is one of them. And to pinpoint the reality that we have in Mexico and in the region, we invite you to listen to Carlos Elizondo Meyer, who is a very renowned analyst in our country. Carlos Meyer is political science from Oxford, and also he has a government and public transportation school for Tecnológico de Monterrey. He also was the general director of the Investigation and Economics Teaching Center, where he was professor and investigator too. In 2004, he was named ambassador for the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Now he works for several media like Foro TV and Radio Formula. And also with Federico Heroles, he has a TV show, Primer Círculo, with ADN 40. He has written several papers about the reforms of these politics in Mexico and Latin America. Welcome, Carlos. Thank you for being with us. And welcome to this conference of the panel of the view of the challenges.
How are you doing? I think you hear me because I wasn't able to listen to you. I hope it's been a good presentation, but I haven't been listening to you. Is everything okay? Can you listen to me? Well, I don't hear you. I hope you're listening to me. If you're not listening to me, please tell me. Well, let's start. It's a pleasure for me to be here in this transportation forum, this virtual forum that has other characteristics. For me, it's a great honor to be here, to be participating today. What you do is important for us. This capacity that this company has to integrate this productive chains in a world like this one, a virtual world with all these complexities that it involves. We will be in the future remembering these years as the years as very challenging years in the history of the world. We have never imagined that we will be spending these months in our houses, that we will be facing these challenges to overthink how to articulate these economies, how to connect with our family, with our friends. This is something that has never happened before, something that we never imagined could happen. And it's very difficult to know where this will lead us. We don't know about the doctors, for example, the vaccine, the pills, the influenza, the flu. It's not easy times. It's very complicated times. These administrative structures into how to react before this COVID-19. But as you can see, we do know something about this. As when I move my hand, it's because I need the next slide. We're going to have an economic recession. We have never seen something like this in Latin America. In the world, it is said that synchronically, as we are seeing, it is said that we're facing a recession such as in the 30s or in the 40s, that nothing similar has been happening since the 30s. But it's different because in the 30s we had some economies, rural economies. A lot of the population had the auto consume, and now we are globalized, and they are suffering as a few ones. And I'm going to try to explain why. First, we can see how are the expectations for 2020. And as you can see, the region in general has the worst expectations that we can imagine. And this has to do with a lot of reasons that are very important. The first, like in China, we don't have to sacrifice health in order to help economy. We have to be at our houses. We have to stay there. Today, the Chinese people are going back to the normal life, but they stayed in their houses. They faced well this pandemic. But China, Vietnam, a lot of countries are going to the right way, to normality. But as we can see in this graphic, Mexico, Peru, Argentina are in a very difficult situation. And this has to do because they are economies, because they didn't make these people to isolate themselves. And then we've been sending these signals. Some other countries have done it better. This isolation capacity, for example, in Chile or Argentina, it was stronger, better than in Mexico or in Peru. But in all of these countries, there's a similar phenomenon. Very economic that are very dependable, that they depend on each other. They are difficult to stop. They are related to the economic market in the world, and this stat capacity is very difficult in terms of health. And if we can see this in this slide, the expectations of growing in 2021 are not so good as well. AMLO is insisting to do a recovery in V that is similar to a scale. The panorama, the outlook is not so good. The one of the monetary system, the expectation of growth is poor. This is not what we are estimating. It's decreasing, and we don't know if we will need to isolate again because in Spain, as we are seeing, they are having a problem again. Countries like Peru, we are expecting to have a better situation, but below what we are expecting. And there is no country where we can see the situations which are having a V shape. Colombia is the closest country, but this depends on which is the trajectory of this disease, of COVID 19. As we can see in the next slide, in Mexico, what we have here is the outlooks of this moment, the forecast of it, of growing of this year. In February, we were expecting the economy to grow a little bit in V shape as we were seeing it, but it didn't grow. The economy is sinking. As you can see there, this is the forecast that analysts, economic analysts are doing by the Bank of Mexico. And as you can see, each month that we have been living, that has been passing, we have a more complicated pandemic. In July, the expectation of growth for the next year was of less than 10%. We are waiting for the SAT to give us a better panorama about it, of incomes this 9th of September. We are going to see there some of the real expectations, but we have here the is of this year. And the next one is less optimistic. The next 2 years, 21 and 22, are worse as well, are bad. We have 2.5, 2.7, but after a fall of 10%, and hardly we will see in Mexico a level of GDP in the economy when AMLO arrived. But until he finished his presidency, we will see a real result because we don't see a real growing in economy. In this other slide, in this other graphic, is more visual. Here, what we have is the rich that Mexico is producing, the richness, the wealth. And what we can see here is that the economy was not growing that much. You can see the GDP from the year of 2000 and the GDP of 2018. We can see that it, it, the crisis was severe. It has an impact, a very important impact, but it recovered. The economy recovered. And some years after, and a year and a half, it recovered, and it grew a little. As we can see, then with AMLO, this growing stopped, and it is falling that we had never seen before. If we compare it with GDP that produced in the second third of the isolation, it was a very critical moment, and we are returning to 28. The second third will have to be better, but we won't see a recovery of the economy. We won't see that V shape that we can see there. We are not going to see that in this year. And with AMLO. And in this next graphic, it's a comparison of the economy when the crisis started. And here, what we can see is how this crisis that we are having now is deeper than the one in 94, the one in 2008. That is very different from what we are seeing now. If we see the next graphic and we compare the industrial production from the United States, this is a very important data. An optimistic theme and issue is our relationship with United States, something that Latin America doesn't have. All of them depend on the commodities. Mexico depends less of that. Even it depends on products such as we of petroleum, for example, we depend on a lower price because we import more than we export. But in industrial production, it, we depend a lot on the United States. And this is a good signal because the United States economy is recovering, not in the V-shaped economy, but something similar. And as you can see in this graphic, our fallen in industrial production was much more deeper. Why? Because our isolation was very strange, to say it in a certain way. It wasn't mandatory, but a lot of activities were closing. We were not producing beer. We kept on making Dos Bocas refinery, but all mines were closed. So that economic hole was bigger because the isolation was not mandatory. it will recover. It's a motor of the Mexican economy, and we are seeing all the industrial part recovering itself as the same as the United States. But that whole is not going to be forgotten. The exportations are recovering. We are not in the levels that we were previous to this fallen, but we have a V shape. This unfortunately is not what we were expecting, but this big chunk is not the whole economy. What is stopping the economy? What is stopping the economy? All these were just we're in the middle of a transformation. This crisis, go back please. This crisis accelerated another one. Another one. The crisis accelerated and structural change. Uh, Winners were coming. A lot of people knew how to use Amazon, which was a retail winner. Malls, but clearly this pandemic accelerated this because this became the only way to get some products. But not only this, but in Mexico we will have losers, structural losers. This is not only to open to tourism. If you open to tourism but there's no trust to have the optimal conditions, well, you will not have tourists. The hotels will be empty. Foreign tourists will not like to go out in a country that has not controlled the pandemic, and there are sectors that are not going to recover because this trust is not going to come back. Even though they could have the right resources or the economic resources to travel, they are not going to do it. So this will lead to an economy to reproduce part of the production.
Integrated to the United States, and it
And because of this pandemic, Mexicans are not going to the movies. In China, they went back to the movies. For example, flights in China.
the levels we are where we were before the pandemic because China is confined. But as we have not done one or the other, we will see a level very low in aviation for several years and we won't see a recovery. We have some structures that are good for us, which is the money that comes from the United States. That is just a reflection of our fragility, of all the Mexicans who went to the United States, and a reflection that they are still working there and they are generous. But have you seen how has changed this send of money during this administration? If we see the total value they had in 2016, which were 36,000 million, it was almost 3% of the GDP. All the industry of gas, for instance, it is like 5%, more or less. So this is money that comes to the poorest in Mexico, and this creates some defense of the purchase ability of the population, but it is not so well distributed because there are populations that migrate more than others, and as this has been on in a long time, and there is a lower amount of money that comes abroad, but this will, of course, open some certainties for the future. We have a world that competes more for investments, and our public politics has not been to attract these foreign investments that builds new hotels or new industries. Mexico is now in a moment in which we could be taking advantage of the complex conflict or the complex relationship between China and the US that is leading for other activities that were being done in China are not being done there anymore. This famous delocalization of manufacturing capacity that China had, and see how the investment level came. And the line above is how much foreign people invest in Mexico, and it is very erratic, as you see, but the trend is not good, and we are not taking advantage of this opportunity to attract this manufacturing investment that does not want to be in China. And Mexico has a lot of virtues compared to other parts of the world for localization, for TEMEC, for the time. So it is one of the most important things, this TEMEC, and the president understood that and he did it right. That's a good opportunity, but it is not enough. If the trust conditions are not generated to attract the investment. And if the investment thinks that there will not be enough energy for their processes, they will think it twice before coming. And the change in energy politics is generating that if the game will change. The persons who had plans of solar panels and now they cannot connect it to the electric system, well, that it is a terrible sign of how it is to make business in Mexico. As you see the line below, that is the investment of Mexican companies in shares abroad. And there is a tendency here, a trend. In the second trimester of 2020, they invested in buying shares of industries, cinema shares, which was one of the big investments of last semester, because the Mexican investors have risks that they didn't have before, and they want to put their chances in other parts. So the incoming year, we will have a structural condition which will be very complex regarding budget. So far, the government has done well. We'll see why. This is the income of the government compared to other periods, and as you can see, the earnings are not so different in the first semester. And if you see below the red bars, it has fallen a lot. This income of petroleum. This government decided to put everything on petroleum. He neglected other areas in order to try to increase the production of petroleum and refined products in our country, and it has failed in both. The petroleum production was expected to be in 2 million a day of barrels, but last month while we were in 1.6 billion below, so there's no way we can get to the goal, and the price has fallen. It is less than 20 now, and will not come back to the 50s that was in the budget for this year. So the government, it is in a complex problem with this. And if we see how we see a distinction in the earnings of Pemex and the earnings of the federal government, and we'll see the government has expended a lot, but even though the pressure in the public finances for Pemex, which has a decreased production, but which structure hasn't changed, all that has generated a lot of lack of trust of how will the finance look next year. If we see this is the success of the taxing collection of this government, as we have seen the VAT or the YEPs and other taxing, we can see that it has done a good job, even though the last two trimesters, the last 2 months, sorry, the VAT just came to the floor. Why? Because there are no sales, so there's no VAT, and the important thing is the important ability to collect ESR, the tax collection for the big companies. That has been very successful. But for the next year, the budget will have to based on the income of a much low income coming from taxes or coming from petroleum, and that is the problem we will all have because the government capacities will be compromised by this cut of the budget, and because there will be a lot of pressure of taxing authorities. They will not rise taxes. The president promised that wouldn't happen, even though the cameras, the senators are flittering with that idea. But it will be a very complicated scene for companies. And now the good and bad news is that Mexican government is one of those that have supported the less their companies. And from these three countries, Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico, as a part or portion of the GDP, hasn't given credit or guarantees. And Argentina, which has a very compromised taxing situation, decided to support more. So that is why we will not have a V-shaped recovery, because many companies died or will be dying because of lack of support regarding taxes. And the only good news is that because we didn't waste so much money, the situation of the federal government will be a little bit less compromised. I am comparing two companies. The the debt the debt you will see if we subtract the earnings that has our governments. I would like to just compare the debt of these two countries, and as you see in 2018 Brazil owed more money, but us will go much worse. It will go to 65 points of the GDP, while Brazil goes beyond 100. So I think that diminishes the risk of a deep crisis. And this idea of the government of not wasting so much money has as a virtue that we will not be in the very edge as Brazil we will be, as we see in this plot. So we will have to wait until the final numbers came out to see what will be for 2021. Now, other topic where Latin America has a big problem, and you will see that more in detail with Alejandro in a tomorrow's session. I will just introduce the notion that Latin America is the region of the world which more homicide per person in the world. Not all the countries, as we will see, but these three countries has a very high rate of homicides. Mexico is the worst of all these three, and I only chose here, but there are other countries in Latin America that have other much less violence rate. But we are in a business, we are in a business of moving things around. I suspect that we will see more crime coming in, organized crime, mostly in Mexican case, where the authority has been very unclear and very less effective to shorten the power of drug cartels, but also in in the scale of the individual, because we don't have very good social security, we don't have institutions of law enforcement. We have seen in all the crises that violence goes up, of course. And in the Mexican case, we are coming from a trend that has grown a lot since the last president government. It is incredible the lack of capacity and also the very good media work that was done for this to be unnoticed, but that violence grew so much where the last government of Enrique Peña Nieto was able to manage the violence crisis a little bit. I guess that under this enormous pressure, the violence will deteriorate, will go up, of course. And as we can see in the next plot, in the monthly numbers of homicides. In Mexico, they are killing around 3,000 Mexicans a month, and 2,000 of these can be related to organized crime. So the Mexicans kill Mexicans a lot, but if the organized crime that hasn't been put under control, the strategy of hogs and not shooting, it is of course not working. And let's go to the problem that everything is coming from the pandemic. Our president used the phrase that the pandemic is over, but we are clearly not there yet. We are the fourth country in number of deaths. It changed yesterday because India has a much more population and it is starting to accelerate this death rate. And we can see that between the 10 countries, the top 10, we have three countries of Latin America, Peru, Mexico, and others. So we can see how much pain we have in Mexico, considering the way in which we count the death toll in Mexico. It's very imperfect. There are several or many people who die in their homes without ever having a COVID diagnosis. And with the healthy measures of how to bury your dead, many families make an effort for them not to be considered as COVID cases. So, well, and if we see these, I will stop a little bit more in here. These are the deaths in COVID for every million inhabitants. What I want to show is that almost all Latin America was disastrous. Even countries like Argentina that made an effort to fight it back have been in an accelerated phase of the death toll for a million inhabitants. Uh, a country like Chile that did very well in the beginning, but the isolation stopped very quickly, and that made a huge leap in the death toll. And what can we say of Mexico, Brazil, and Peru, who very early on time they came to a high level of death per a million inhabitants, and we have been there. Mexico has gone down a little bit. Of course, it is appreciated, but I don't know if it will keep that way because we are going out more. And if we compare that to the same numbers and graphs, other countries that made a good confinement, and they have a lot of deaths, but it fell very quickly. And even though the rebound in Spain, they keep in a good level, but of course, the United States have also done it very bad. And if we see the next one, there is a situation in which there will be a lot of uncertainty of how much will the pandemic affect us. Are we stuck? Is the slide stuck? Anyway, I will tell you while the presentation works. There's a little bit more to come, but I would like to mention that that we will have a long time to answer your questions about the political impact of all this. This great shock, this disruption in the economic growth, these big changes in the well-being of the population, we've seen that before. They are associated with changes in our politics. In the 30s, that crisis had an impact, a crashing effect on European democracies, and one of the reasons of the Nazism and its terrible pain. The crisis in 2008, which was much less than this, explains how Trump came to the chair, how AMLO came to the chair, the globalizer scene, but some leaders came in with a different kind of speech